Woohoo! Welcome back. Today, I'm going to do something so you don't have to. Yay! Although you are perfectly welcome and capable of doing this, this is something that a lot of times people leave to just watching the video rather than trying at home. But again, you're welcome to, and I think it is a great exercise. A true story, when I was in school, I could not remember the quadratic formula, and so I derived it when I needed to use it. So I just learned how to complete the square really, really well. So what we're going to do is, instead of completing the square on a particular problem, we're going to complete the square in the general form. So we're going to start off with ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and I'm going to use all the steps we've been using for completing the square and see if we can solve for x. So let's go to it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the c over on the other side. And to do this problem, in the next step, I'm going to have to assume that a is not equal to 0. And this is something that I will note at the top. Now, if a is equal to 0, then this isn't actually a quadratic, right? If that's 0, then we've really just got bx plus c. So a not being 0 is going to be a very important part of this. But the next step, I'm going to divide through by a. If you remember in the previous video, I showed you what to do when there was that 3 out in front. We had to divide through. So this is when people start to get a little nervous. So, if you need to, pause, go get a snack, go get some popcorn. I'm going to walk through it. It's actually pretty straightforward. It just requires that, nerves of steel. But, it'll all turn out, I promise. So I'm going to divide every term by a. And yes, I know this means that now everybody's infected. Okay, so now we've got a bunch of fractions. Yay! The next step, as you might recall, and here I'm trying to remember to use the same colors every time in case you like the colors if they're helpful, then it will hopefully be a memory aid. We're going to take the coefficient of x, b over a, and we're going to multiply by 1/2. That'll give us b over 2a. And then we're going to take that number and we're going to square it. And that I underlined in blue, as I recall. So that's going to be the blue. And now to square a fraction, you square each of the factors in the numerator and the denominator. So I get b squared up on top, okay? Then I get 2 squared, that's 4, and then I get a squared. And then I'm going to take that I just got, and I'm going to add it to both sides. And I know at this point, a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, this is like the worst horror movie ever. Or the best, possibly. Imagine the horror movie Don't Complete the Square. Dum, dum, dum. But I'm going to go ahead and do it because, nerves of steel. Now, I can choose, when I add this to the left and the right, I can choose where I put it. I'm going to put it at the end here because I am completing a square. I know it doesn't look like a perfect square, but this is now a perfect square, believe it or not. However, over on the other side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to put the b squared all over 4a squared first. And then remember we had this minus c over a. That'll go right here. So I'm going to put it in first. Now, you may recall, if you've seen the other videos, that I said you can sort this out and figure out what this was in terms of a perfect square, or you can remember that it will just be x, and then whatever the blue underline, whatever this first amount was. Now, hopefully those of you who've studied the quadratic formula are starting to recognize some of the pieces. So it's not feeling quite so scary, but we are going to have to combine these. And I will want to find a common denominator. And so somewhere over here, I'm going to probably put it up here where I've got a little bit extra space. I'm going to see that for this, my least common denominator between 4a squared and a is going to be 4a squared. So this is already written in common denominator land, but I need to rewrite the c over a. And I'm going to have to rewrite it in a form that includes 4a squared. So in order to get there, I'm going to multiply by a 4 and an a. So that means I have to multiply on top by a 4 and an a. So then I get 4ac. And hopefully those of you who've studied the quadratic formula, you're starting to say, oh my goodness, look at that. That's where that comes from. So now I have b squared all over 4a squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. And I'm going to need another piece of paper. So let me bring in another piece of paper. So far, so good. I'm just following the rules. I'm using just the regular math. It's the reason that it's intimidating is because it's a lot of letters walking around and running around and dancing around. So make sure you're writing big. Make sure you're hydrating. And, if you start to get a little spinny, take a break. Come back. You don't have to do this all in one take. Okay, so I now have the quantity x plus b over 2a squared. And over on the other side, I've got b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. At which point a lot of people are like, wait a minute. It's supposed to be b squared minus 4ac over 2a. It's not quite right, but we're not quite done yet. So what I did was I took these two fractions and I combined them into a single fraction. We are almost there. This is very exciting. Can you taste it? Woohoo. Okay, so that's where we are. What's the next step? Well, remember in completing the square, we have completed the square, and now we have to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of the left, x plus b over 2a, the quantity squared, and I'm going to take the square root of the right. Granted, it's a lot. If you ever want to impress someone and or get them to walk away from you, start explaining this. Remember to put the plus or minus in. Now, over on the left-hand side, the square root of something squares undoes itself. So all we have is x plus b over 2a. Now, over on the right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and this is because I know where I want to go with this. So normally you'd have a lot of choices, and there's a particular place I want to be. The plus or minus is, believe it or not, a single sign. It's two of them, but just a single sign. So it doesn't go top and bottom. It goes top or bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this radical, and I'm going to split it up into the numerator and the denominator, and I'm going to leave the plus or minus up top. This is what it looks like. And the reason that I'm making that choice is that you're not allowed to leave a fraction inside of a square root because it's just nasty, but also because 4a squared, when I take radical of that, it also simplifies. So let me go ahead and simplify that. Radical 4 is 2. Radical a squared is a. And those of you who know the formula are already seeing it. You're like, okay, that's where that came from. That's where that came from. And the last thing is I want to simplify for x, or sorry, solve for x. So I want to subtract b over 2a from both sides. And my last step is going to be to combine these two fractions since they have a common denominator. Isn't that cool that they have a common denominator? I mean, as much as this is it's a complicated set of steps, but as much as it is complicated, didn't that work out nicely? Relatively nicely, things kind of worked out. And this is then what we end up calling the quadratic formula. Woohoo! Now, most people will never have to do this process. If there's any chance you want to become a math teacher, you will do this all the time, so you might want to pay extra attention. For the rest of everyone else, this is just kind of an interesting situation and an example that completing the square is actually possible even in the ugliest of situations. But for most folks, what we're going to focus on is this result. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use this formula to solve quadratic equations, which is woohoo, chef's kiss. Mwah. You guys are awesome. Go get a break. We're going to do a few more things to finish out this chapter. And so hydrate, get some exercise, pet your favorite orange tabby cat, as I am doing right now, and know that you are amazing. And I am so excited that you are here with me on this journey and that you are being so brave and that you are so brilliant. And I hope that you math on. Woohoo.